This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were two twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of the red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die." Esau said, "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Thank you. There is some echo coming through from the speakers. Okay, the story we have today is a story that has puzzled many generations of people who read the Bible, specifically even for us today. It is a family story of one family, but a family that has consequences for us today because of what happened with this family. And it's a story that we should become familiar with, our children should become familiar with, because it's central to how it comes to define us. Families have family stories that children, as they grow up, they hear about these stories. And often those stories shape who they become. And this is one of those stories that, even though it doesn't belong to our immediate families today, it is a story our children must come to know. Because it is a story that defines who they become when they grow up. It is a story where we find essentially three characters that I want us to focus on this morning. It is a mother and her two sons. That's the story that we're going to focus on. But because before we get to that, there is the fourth character, which is Isaac. As you saw from the start of the passage we read, it says this is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. So the writer here is wanting to tell us about Isaac. In fact, if you go through the book of Genesis, it is divided into parts like this, where every section starts with, this is the account of Adam, this is the account of Abraham, this is the account of Jacob, this is the account of Isaac. And that's how the Bible, the book of Genesis is structured. And this section here is about the son of Abraham. We always read about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the one in the middle. It says Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Those of you who were at church last weekend at Joburg, we spoke about that in chapter 24 of Genesis. So he was 40 years old when he got married. Now, 40 years old today, even by the standards of those days, it was an old age to be getting married. It might well be that it took long for them to find a wife for him, as we heard last week. That's why he was growing older without getting married, because there was no girls around. That's why Abraham ended up sending his servant to a far country to go find a girl for him. But I want you to notice something else that happens. It says Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, and so on. And then it says in verse 21, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. Like Isaac's mother, Sarah, Isaac's wife was also barren. She was not getting children. And yet these are the people that God says they are going to have children who are going to turn into big nations, multitudes of peoples. And yet they start off barren without being able to conceive a child. And then as we read here, it says Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. He prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. And the Lord answered his prayer. And his wife Rebekah became pregnant. And at the time that the children were born, Isaac was 60 years. So 20 years passed from the marriage to the time these children were born. And I know there are many parents who go through that kind of struggle, where they get married expecting a child to come soon. And year 1 passes, year 2 passes, 3, 4, 5 years, 7, 10 years, 15, 20 years, they give up. In fact, I know cases where women were divorced before 20 years passes because the man gives up and he wants a child. And he feels, because this woman can't give me a child, I'm going to move on. And we have that happening. But this is not Isaac. Isaac does not saw this girl away and say, look, my father told me through my lineage, God is planning to do a big thing. Probably the father had told him how long he waited himself for Isaac. That even though they had to wait long, he must never give up. So even after 20 years, Isaac was not giving up. And so it says she became pregnant. In verse 22, the babies jostled each other within her. And she said, why is this happening to me? And this is almost a pattern that happens in many stories we hear about, where a woman struggles to fall pregnant. And after she falls pregnant, the pregnancy has its own problems. Because when she falls pregnant, she starts rejoicing, thinking, my prayers have been answered. But before she knows, 2 or 3 months into the pregnancy, there are problems with the pregnancy. And this is the story of Rebekah. As these children start growing in a womb, they are causing her a lot of discomfort. They are moving more than normal babies move. And she doesn't know what is going on. And as you can see there, she asks herself a question. Why is this happening to me? And it's a fair question. Many of us go through difficulties in our lives. And we look at others who don't have those problems and say, but why is this happening to me and not to others? We see others having good pregnancies, no problems, they give birth, they are okay. Why do I have struggled to fall pregnant? And when I'm pregnant, why do I have to struggle with my pregnancy? That's the question she asks herself. But I want you to see what she does in verse 22. She doesn't ask, why is this happening to me? And give herself an answer. It says, so she went to inquire of the Lord. She went to ask God, why is this happening to me? She wants God to be the one that answers the question. She doesn't go to her friends. She doesn't go to Isaac. She doesn't go to other people. She goes to God. But often that's the one place we don't go. When things are not going well with us, when we ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? What have I done to deserve what's happening to me? We go to others, and others tell us stories. They tell us stories about how our neighbor is bewitching us, about something that we've done wrong. And so often there's nothing to do with that. As we can see here, because there was something at play which God knew about. And in verse 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So God gives her an answer. And he tells her about what's going on. What's going on has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the babies that are in your womb. These babies represent 2 nations. They represent 2 kinds of people. That's what you are carrying. And it's important to understand that because this is the beginning of the story of the people of God and those who are not the people of God. We know about the story of the verse that says, God hated Esau, and he loved Jacob. And people ask themselves, why would God hate Esau and love Jacob? You see, that story has nothing to do with Jacob and Esau as individuals. Before these babies were born, before these 2 boys were born, God had already pronounced their lives over them. It had nothing to do with Esau. It had nothing to do with Jacob. It had to do with what God was planning to do. In fact, Paul gives us a good commentary of this story in the book of Romans chapter 9. Romans chapter 9, I'll read verse 10 and 11. It says, not only that, but Rebekah's children had one and the same father. I want you to understand that. They had one and the same father, our father Isaac. Because often I've seen parents racking their brains, saying, I've given birth to these 2 children. But you can swear this one doesn't look like me. Not only doesn't look like me, but he doesn't even behave like me. He doesn't even behave like my ancestors. He has taken nothing from us. And they can't understand whose child is he. And if they could do it, they will reject it. But they know he's their child. And he's completely different to the other child. And this is the story we see here. And this is what Paul reminds us of. That not only that Rebekah's children had one and the same father, yet before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, before Esau had done anything wrong, before Jacob had done anything wrong, God pronounced what their lives were going to be like. God pronounced what their lives were going to be like. And it says by Paul here, in order that God's purpose in election may stand, not by works, but by him who calls. What was happening here, which we normally see as maybe the unfairness of God, it is actually the story about the gospel. That our salvation is not dependent on us. It is dependent on the election of God. It is not by our works. So the election of Jacob over Esau had nothing to do with what they did. And this is what God is demonstrating to us. That your salvation, your becoming Jacob, your becoming a follower of Jesus, has nothing to do with you as a person. You are no better than the person who is in the street now, who's not sitting in church. It is on the basis of the one who calls, he says. He is the one who determines that. But in these two children, there was an illustration of what God is going to do in the world. It says in verse 24, when the time had come for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. Something very strange happens. These babies are born, and they look completely different from birth. The one skin is full of hair already. Maybe the writer is exaggerating, but he says the skin felt like a hairy garment. When they say hairy garment, those days, hairy garments would be the skin of the animal. Because the people who used to wear animal skins. That's how rough his skin and hair was. So they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. So as they are born, Esau comes out first, but as he comes out, the hand of Jacob is holding on to the heel of Esau. The same wrestling and jostling for positions in the womb that was happening. Because one of the mysteries we have is that when there are twins in the womb, who comes out first? How is that determined? It sounds like the struggle of the babies in the womb was about that fight, who goes out first. Because the one who goes out first, even though they are born minutes apart, becomes the firstborn. And he claims to be older than the other, just because he came out first. Imagine that. Two people born on the same day, same hour, but the other one born 2 minutes earlier is claiming to be older than the other by 2 minutes. And he's proud of that. And in that generation, that 2 minutes made a difference in that when the father died, the inheritance for the one who came 2 minutes earlier was huge. They got double the portion of the others. That's why coming out first was important. And that's why these babies are fighting to be number one. And sometimes, this fighting to be number one, we find it in our own children. Where they are jostling around, they are fighting each other because they want to be number one to us. It looks like this is what these kids were doing. That's what the two boys were doing. But God had already pronounced that their destinies are going in different directions. The boys grew up in verse 27, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Now we can read that verse and think this is small matter. Those of you who know the scriptures, when it says he was a skillful hunter, who does it remind you of? Nimrod. Earlier in the book of Genesis, we are told about another man who was a skillful hunter. But we know in the story of Nimrod, being a skillful hunter was not a compliment. It was a man who wanted to do his own thing apart from God. He wanted to build his own empire apart from God. And so when you read that, because you see, the same writer is writing this chapter. When you read something like that, you must understand, when we're told about the skillful hunter in Nimrod, and the skillful hunter in Esau, these are not separate ideas. He wants you to remember that the person who's a skillful hunter is not good. That's what he's supposed to tell us. He is a man of the open country, he says. He is a man of the field. He is a man who plays the field. But Jacob, it says, he was a quiet man who stayed at home in the tents. And for many of our young people today, this is what is playing out. You see, last night, a lot of those that are like Esau, who think of themselves as the skillful hunters, who think of themselves as the men of the open country, were in the clubs. They were up and about last night. Those are the men of the country. Those are the skillful hunters. They are roaming around the streets at night over weekends, going to clubs, going to bars, going drinking, going taking drugs. That's what the Esau's of today are doing. They are different to the Jacob of today, because the Jacob of today, it says he was quiet. He was a quiet man, and he stayed at home in the tent. And there were many Jacobs last night who, when the friend said, let's go clubbing, they said, no, I'll stay home tonight. Because tomorrow morning I'm going to church. That's the difference between Esau and Jacob. Esau wants to be a man of the country. And Jacob wants to stay at home. And then I want you to see what happens with the parents. Verse 28. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau. Just because he loves game meat, he loved this boy who goes hunting and bring him this meat. And he despised the younger one, Jacob. But Rebekah, probably because the boy was always around him and he was building a nice relationship with the mother, she loved Jacob. Because they were probably spending more time together. And we find that sometimes happening with parents, where the parents love the one more than the other. It happens. But it's a bad thing, as you see, when their story progresses, that is a bad thing. But then the most important part of this story happens from verse 29. That begins to reveal exactly the nature of these two boys. In verse 29 it says, once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He went probably, my father used to be a hunter. He used to have dogs. And on weekends, Saturday morning, he would wake up 4 a.m. in the morning and go into the mountains with his dogs to hunt. To hunt kudus, balas, all kinds of animals. But there were good days and there were bad days. And sometimes he goes and he comes back 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 8, 9, 10 hours later, and he caught nothing. And this was the day of Esau. He came in from the open country from hunting, and he was hungry because he didn't get anything that day. And as he arrives at home, he said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of your stew. I am dying. Now, often we use that kind of language. I am dying of hunger. Of course, we're exaggerating. We're not dying. If you don't eat now, you're not going to die. Many of us probably fasted yesterday, the whole day, we didn't die. You can fast for 40 days and not die. But he comes in and he says, I'm dying. Please let me have your stew. It says that is why he was called Edom, because Edom means red, and that stew was the red stew. In verse 31, Jacob replied, first sell me your birthright. So from day one, Jacob knew that because he was born a minute after Esau, he has lost out on the birthright of the firstborn. And it bothered him. And he wanted it. And this day he thinks my time, my opportunity has arisen. He says, well, if you want my stew, you give me the birthright. You make me the firstborn. Then you can have the stew. Now, at that point, the birthright is just a promise that one day that birthright will be worth something. On that day, it was worth nothing. It was just a future promise that he had. But Jacob says, first sell me your birthright. And verse 32, he says, look, I'm about to die. That's Esau's words. I'm about to die. Just give me the damn stew. He says. He says, what good is the birthright to me now? Why should I wait for another 20, 30 years for a birthright when today I'm dying? And Esau, being a scheming man, he says to him, swear to me first, and then I'll give you the birthright. So Esau swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And here I want you to see the difference of that generation and our generation today. That your word was as good as a signature on paper. And so Jacob knows if he says in his mouth that I'm giving you the birthright in exchange for the stew, it's a deal. It's as if they signed the papers. And he gave him. Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and he drank, and then he got up and left again. He eats and he leaves again. This is a man who doesn't love being around at home. He just came in hungry, he gets the stew, he eats, he leaves again as soon as he finishes eating. This is the kind of person Esau was. And it says the last verse of chapter 25. So Esau despised his birthright. He looked down on the birthright. He didn't value it. He didn't appreciate what he had. And as humans, I want you to see what God has done with this story. That the firstborn has been given the birthright. And the secondborn desires it as well. And the people who desire Jesus, as you heard in the update, are the people who desire the birthright of Jesus. Because when you come to Christ and you are united with Christ, you share in his birthright. You share in his inheritance. But it says Esau despised it. Esau is like those that despise Jesus. To despise Jesus is to despise the birthright that God has given us through Jesus. In Jesus, we have been given the right of a firstborn. In Jesus, all humans are firstborns. When you accept Jesus, you become a firstborn, even when you are not a firstborn. And to reject Jesus is to say, I don't care about being a firstborn. I don't care about the birthright of a firstborn. This is what this passage challenges us about. It asks us this question: do we reject the birthright of Jesus, or do we accept it? And that's the question I want to ask each one of us today. And often we reject it for small matters. Young people give up the birthright of Jesus for small matters. Because of hunger, because of a little pain, because of wanting to look good to your friends. They will give up their birthright and rather smoke and rather take drugs, rather become drunkards, rather sleep around. All these things just because there is a momentary pleasure that they are looking for. And the birthright that is in the future, that is promised in Jesus, looks so far away, they feel is irrelevant for them. And this is the sad story. And this is the difference between believers and unbelievers. Believers are willing to say, they are willing to say to their flesh, Paul uses that language. He says, bind your flesh. Don't allow hunger or pain of the flesh to make you give up on your birthright. Don't allow it to do that. Because these are temporary things. Giving up what is eternal. That is the danger. In fact, in Hebrews tells us about the danger of doing this. He says in Hebrews 12, verse 16 and 17, see to it that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau. See to it that none of you is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance as the oldest son. And afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Later in life, when his father was about to die, he realized he needs that birthright. But it was too late. He had given it up. He had given it over to his brother. And his brother received it. He received the blessing of the father. It says, even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. He cried to his father. Because you know the story, just to jump to the end of the story, when Isaac came to be old and he knew he was going to die, he called his children to bless them. But you see, the parents did not know that the children had swapped the birthright. So Isaac was still planning to bless Esau, the firstborn. So he asked him, go and hide me a good animal, come prepare it and serve me. What after I've eaten my favorite meal, I'm going to bless you. And Rebekah heard that. And when Esau was gone to hunt, she prepared food and she asked Jacob to go serve his father Isaac, pretending to be Esau. And Isaac, who was blind but then, who did not know that this is not Esau, but Jacob, he blessed him thinking that he was blessing Esau. So all the blessing of the firstborn, which he meant for Esau, went to Jacob. And when Esau came back and he prepared the meal and he went to serve his father, the father was surprised. But I had finished eating and I already blessed you. Why are you coming with another meal? And then Esau realized that his brother, Jacob, tricked him. He went in before him. And he cried to his father and says, don't you have another blessing for me? Is there nothing left for me? You can't have given everything to that boy. And the father told him, I'm sorry, my boy. The blessing has gone to Jacob. The blessing had gone to Jacob. And this is the story that today I want us to cherish in our lives. That even as we live every day, we remember this story. Because this story is a story that defines whether we become believers in Jesus or we don't. The difference between Esau and Jacob is to do with whether they value the birthright or not, whether they desire it or not. It has nothing to do with them especially. Jacob was not a good man. I want you to understand that. In this story, we are not told that Jacob is a good man. He stole the birthright from his brother. He was not a good man. But the one thing that we're told about him, he desired that which is good. So, all of us are sinners here. To be a Jacob is not to be somebody who doesn't commit sin. To be a Jacob is to be somebody who sins but knows that there is somebody who has the birthright and I want that birthright. There is somebody who is righteous and I want his righteousness. There is somebody who died for me and I want him so that my sins can be forgiven. That's what it means to be a Jacob. It doesn't mean to be a good person. It means somebody who knows their weaknesses and they are willing to sacrifice everything for that which is of value. And believers come to understand that. And they go after it the same way Jacob did. By hook or crook, Jacob was going to get there. And that should be the mind of Christians. That by hook or crook, I won't let go of Jesus. By hook or crook, I want his birthright. By hook or crook, I want his blessing. That's what should drive us. And that's what drove Jacob. And those that reject Jesus are like Esau. They say, what is that worth for me when my life is like this today? I'm dying today. I would rather sort out my life today and forget about the future. Those are the ones that we should not become like. And that's what this story is wanting to remind us of. So today I want you to go away desiring to be like Jacob, who desired the birthright, and not be like Esau, who despised his birthright. Amen. Amen.